All right, let's get into one of the wildest and honestly most brilliant stories from the secret archives of military history. We're talking about a top secret weapon that was cheap, easy to find, and, well, it cooed.
So let's just start with a big question, because it sounds like something out of a Saturday morning cartoon. Could a pigeon, yeah, a regular city pigeon, actually pilot a smart bomb? I know it sounds completely nuts, but believe it or not, during the darkest days of World War II, this wasn't just a silly thought experiment. It was a very, very serious proposal.
And get this, even the inventor himself, the legendary psychologist B.F. Skinner, called it a crackpot idea. This quote right here really sets the stage for the whole story. It's a classic underdog tale about an invention that was laughed at by the scientific elite, but just refused to die.
So you have to be asking, how does a crackpot idea like this even get off the ground? Well, to get that, we've got to rewind the clock back to the start of World War II. You see, in the late 1930s and early 40s, the world was grappling with a scary new kind of warfare. As Skinner himself put it, the airplane emerged as a new and horrible instrument of war. The problem was, while bombs were devastating, they were also super inaccurate. Trying to hit something specific, like a battleship or a factory from thousands of feet up, it was almost impossible. The Allies desperately needed a way to guide a bomb right to its target. So while most top minds were focused on complicated electronics and radio waves, B.F. Skinner looked at the problem and saw an advantage in something much simpler: a living creature. A pigeon. Think about it. They're small, they're cheap, and they have an incredible ability to recognize visual patterns. So his solution, which got the codename Project Pigeon, was to put a living, breathing guidance system right in the nose cone of a missile. Okay, but how in the world do you actually train a pigeon to fly a bomb? This is where Skinner's genius as a behavioral psychologist really shines. And here they are, the pilots themselves, all geared up in their little custom-made flight jackets. The core idea behind it all was something called operant conditioning. Basically, by rewarding the pigeon for doing exactly what he wanted, Skinner could shape its behavior with unbelievable precision. The training itself was a pretty simple four-step deal. First, you project an image of a target, say a ship, onto a little screen. Then, you train the pigeon to peck at that image. Every time it pecks the ship correctly, it gets a little reward, a grain of food. The pigeon figures it out fast. Pecking the ship gets me a snack. And that pecking motion is what was hooked up to steer the missiles. And the results were kind of shocking. The training worked so well that the pigeons would just keep pecking at a target for minutes on end, even if they stopped getting food. They were incredibly focused, totally consistent, and way more reliable than you'd think. One of the birds actually tracked a target for 5 whole minutes without a single break. Just amazing.
So with this kind of success in the lab, you'd think the military would be throwing money at this thing, right? Well, not so much. Getting the establishment to take a pigeon-piloted bomb seriously was a major uphill battle. A very, very long one.
I mean, just look at this timeline of the struggle. In 1940, top scientists basically laughed it out of the room. In 42, it was rejected again, this time because the US didn't even have a missile it could work with. It wasn't until 1943 that a really unlikely hero stepped in. General Mills, yeah, the cereal company. They actually gave them the money to finally build a working prototype. So with that funding finally in hand, Project Pigeon was ready to really take off. The whole system was designed to fit inside an experimental missile they called the Pelican, and the engineering behind it was just pure genius. This is it. This is the nose cone of the Pelican. You can see it's fitted with these lenses. The image of the target would be projected through these lenses onto a screen inside, right in front of our little feathered pilot. Now, the engineers knew they had a potential problem. I mean, what if a pigeon gets distracted or just makes a mistake? Their solution was so simple and so smart. It was basically democratic. Instead of trusting just one bird, they decided to use 3. This thing is just an incredible piece of engineering. They put 3 pigeons in the nose cone, and each one had its own screen and was looking at the same target. The guidance system then averaged the pecking signals from all 3 birds. So if one pigeon went rogue and started pecking off target, the other 2 would overrule it, keeping the missile locked on. It was literally a majority vote system to make sure the flight path was stable. Brilliant. So in early 1944, it was showtime. Skinner's team finally got their shot to prove their system to a committee of the nation's most brilliant scientists. They set up this whole simulator. The target moved around, and the 3-pigeon team tracked it perfectly. By every technical measure, the performance was flawless. But it wasn't enough. And this is the great, kind of tragic irony of the whole project. Skinner later wrote that when the committee members actually looked inside the guidance system and saw a real live pigeon pecking away at the screen, it didn't convince them. It did the exact opposite. The system worked so well, the idea of it was so unbelievable, so fantastic, as he put it, that they just couldn't bring themselves to take it seriously. And just like that, the project was canceled. And that really could have been the end of the story, right? Just a weird footnote in the history books. But the legacy of this so-called crackpot idea is way more surprising than anyone could have ever guessed. Because after the war, the US Navy actually revived the idea. They gave it a new name, Project ORCON, which stood for Organic Control. And this time, with better tech to work with, the research proved conclusively that pigeons weren't just a viable guidance system, they were a really good one. The crackpot idea was finally vindicated. But the project's real impact, the reason we're still talking about it, goes way beyond missiles. It proved that you could scientifically shape complex behaviors. I mean, they tested the pigeons 6 years later, and they still remembered their training. But the biggest legacy of all came from applying these same techniques to people. This is the most astonishing part of the whole story. B.F. Skinner himself said there is a direct genetic connection between Project Pigeon and his later work on teaching machines. The exact same principles used to train pigeons to guide bombs were later adapted to help teach human students. The tech developed for war founded this incredible, profound new purpose in peacetime education. So we'll end on this thought. The story of Project Pigeon is just this amazing reminder that the biggest breakthroughs often look completely bizarre at first. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What ideas out there today are being dismissed as too fantastic, too unbelievable, but are actually quietly laying the groundwork for the world we'll live in tomorrow?